Welcome back to the deep dive. We like to get right to it. You're here for the important stuff. You want it thoroughly explained, but you're busy people. No time to waste, right?
Exactly. Get to the point.
Well, we've got a big one today. There's this renewed interest in the Batalanda Commission report. After that Al Jazeera interview with former President Wickremesing, things really blew up online. And with the report being tabled in Parliament just this past March and a debate coming up in April, it's a good time to break it all down.
It's really interesting how something from so long ago is still so relevant today. You're right. People want to know more about the Batalanda Commission report, especially because it still affects Sri Lankan politics so much.
So for this deep dive, we've got the main source, the Batalanda Commission report itself. We also have a really helpful article to give us some background, Ranil Wickremesing's Wikipedia page, so we can follow his political journey, and even a little snippet that confirms that Al Jazeera interview happened. Our goal today is pretty simple but important. We're going to dig into the main accusations, what the commission actually found, and what this all means for Ranil Wickremesing. Don't worry, we're not going to overwhelm you with information. All right, where do we even start with this? The Batalanda Commission and its investigation, what was it all about?
Okay, to understand it, you have to go back in time. See, the Presidential Commission of Inquiry, and it's important to remember that this is a big deal, it's appointed by the president himself. This commission was set up to investigate what happened at the Batalanda housing scheme. It was supposed to be for housing, but there were accusations that it was being used for illegal activities. We're talking about a really tense time, 1988, 1989, during those uprisings. Things mostly calmed down around 1990. But here's another thing. The Batalanda area was pretty much off limits to the public until late 1994.
So we're looking at events from a really specific time, a very volatile time in Sri Lanka's history. Who are the people on this commission? Who's actually doing the investigating?
The commission had some really important people on it. Justice D. Jaiwakrama was the chairman, and Justice N.E. Disanayak was a member too. Mr. G.K.G. Pereira was the secretary. But there were more people involved, a whole team, like Mr. S.C. Pathirana, an SSP, a senior superintendent of police, Mr. Yasantha Kodagoda, a state counsel, Mr. Sarath Jaiman, also state counsel, and then Mr. R.I. Obesekar, a PC, Mr. T.V. Samanasekara, a DIG, a Deputy Inspector General of Police, and Mr. H.H.M.R. Premareni, he was an SP, a superintendent of police. Oh, and we can't forget the other state counsel who helped the commission. Lots of people working on this.
Wow, that's a lot of people. Shows how serious this investigation was. Now, how did this whole thing even get started? What made people suspicious about Batalanda in the first place?
It actually started in a pretty unusual way. Back in early 1988, someone told an investigator about these supposed torture chambers at Batalanda. The person who gave this information was K.L. Dharmasiri, the leader of the Independent Students' Union at the University of Colombo. He had connections to the JVP through the student movement, and he was a friend of Dai Pathirana, who was killed. Now, during a conversation with this investigator, Dharmasiri just casually mentions that you could probably get weapons from the government if you wanted to. And then he says something really interesting. He makes accusations about Ranil Wickremesing, who was the Minister of Education back then.
So wait, someone mentioned something that seems kind of unrelated, and it ends up leading to this huge investigation.
It does, because this investigator, he knew the Batalanda area. So suddenly they're thinking, wait a minute, maybe there's something going on here. Maybe Wickremesing is involved in something illegal. It was a surprising lead, and it definitely caught their attention. But how does a suspicion, even a strong one, become a big public issue that leads to a presidential commission years later? Well, that's where the newspaper Revaya comes in.
Okay, tell me more.
So in January of 1995, their investigative team actually went to the Batalanda housing complex themselves. What they find is pretty shocking, or at least that's how it's presented. They publish this report, and they actually use the words Batalanda torture chambers. And get this, they point out that the opposition leader at the time, Ranil Wickremesing, had a place there. This report blew up. It got attention all over the country, even internationally.
Wow, so going there was risky. It was still basically a military base.
It was. They had to be clever about it. They got the presidential media unit involved so they could get permission to actually go in and do their investigation. Pretty gutsy move, I'd say.
It really was. That's some impressive journalism. So the Revaya report and these early leads, that's what the commission starts looking into. What were the main accusations? What were they trying to find out?
The big questions were there illegal detention centers at Batalanda? And were people being tortured there? Those were the really serious accusations. And what the commission found was that, yes, houses at Batalanda were being given to police officers. But it wasn't just random. It came from the top.
Okay, so who gave the orders?
The commission found out that Ranil Wickremesinghe, who was the Minister of Industries then, told Asoka Senanayak to allocate houses in Batalanda to specific police officers. Now, Senanayak was the liquidator of the State Fertilizer Manufacturing Corporation. Basically, he was in charge of selling off the company's assets because it was being shut down. But the thing is, these houses were supposed to be for the company's employees, not for the police.
So Wickremesinghe is giving away these houses.
Right. And not just any police officers. These officers were mainly from the counter-subversive unit, the CSU, of the Colonial Police Division. And Senanayak actually admitted to the commission that he did it on Wickremesinghe's orders.
All right, so these houses are being given to this specific police unit. Why were these houses so important for the investigation? What made them different?
Well, the thing about the Batalanda houses was that they were, unfortunately, perfect for doing illegal things. They were pretty secluded, not a lot of people going in and out. And importantly, they weren't officially police quarters, so no one was really paying attention to what was happening there.
So because they weren't official police buildings, it was easier to hide what was going on there.
Exactly. It was like a blind spot. Even Deej MMR Gunaratne, Meryl Gunaratne, he agreed that if the Kalanya CSU wanted to detain and torture people illegally, these houses would be a good place to do it.
That's a chilling thought. Did the commission find actual proof that these abuses happened? What did the people who testified say?
There were a lot of disturbing stories. One case that really stands out is that of Earl Suggy Pereira. He said he was kidnapped, blindfolded, and held prisoner for 22 days in house number B8 at Batalanda. He said he was beaten, questioned about his friends, and he could hear other people screaming. It must have been terrifying.
22 days.
That's
awful.
Clever.
It gets worse. When the commission went to Batalanda in May 1996, Suggy actually pointed out House B8 as the place where he was held. And get this, someone had painted the words "Black Cats" on a window of that house. That house was officially assigned to security officers who worked for ASP Douglas Paris.
Black Cats. That sends chills down my spine, especially with all the talk of vigilante groups back then. What about Suggy's family? Did they try to find him?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
His father, Theobald Patrick Pereira, he did everything he could to find his son. As soon as it happened, he filed a police report, but nothing happened. They didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Then, a few days later, someone gives him a note with a name and phone number. Attorney Lakshman Rana Singh. He was the chairman of the State Pharmaceuticals Corporation. Okay, so what does this lawyer have to do with anything?
Well, Rana Singh supposedly asked for 50,000 rupees to get Suggy released. Former IGP Ernest Pereira backed up Patrick Pereira's story. He confirmed that Patrick had told him about this bribe attempt and that it involved a lawyer connected to Douglas Paris. But when the commission questioned Rana Singh, he denied the whole thing. The commission, though, they believed Ernest Pereira. They wondered why Patrick Pereira would make up a story like that back in 1990, years before the commission even existed.
It's a horrible situation for the family.
Yeah.
Not only is their son kidnapped, but now they're being extorted too. Were there other stories like this? Other people who were abducted and illegally detained?
Yes. Another man, T.M. Bendular, said he was kidnapped by ASP Douglas Paris and two other men. He said they took him to a house, beat him really badly. He saw bloodstains, empty bottles of alcohol, all sorts of things that showed people were being mistreated. He actually managed to escape and went to a relative's house in Badujwada.
It's hard to imagine what these people went through. The report also talks about a doctor who was involved. That's a really disturbing part of the story.
Oh, yes. Dr. Athanayake. He testified that Inspector Nisanka asked him to treat some injured people. They were in handcuffs. At first, he treated them at his own clinic, but then he was asked to go to the Kalanya police station and even to a house at Batalanda. He described one scene in the Batalanda house that was truly horrifying. There were people who had been so badly injured that they were chained to a bed.
Chained to a bed. That's just,
Yeah.
It's hard to even hear. It really shows how bad the situation was. Then there's the case of Sub-Inspector Rohitha Priyadarshana, who disappeared and was later found dead. What did the commission find out about that?
That case is one of the most troubling parts of the whole report. It seems that Priyadarshana got a phone call, supposedly from OIC Kirti Athapattu, telling him to go to the Biagama Village Hotel. That was the last anyone saw of him alive. Later, his body was found in the Kalani River behind the Piliagoda police station. The commission's conclusion was that the police didn't really investigate his disappearance properly. They think there might have been a cover-up.
A cover-up?
It looks that way. Think about this. After Priyadarshana went missing, they marked him as having taken a vacation of post. They actually suggested that he disappeared because he was scared of being implicated by a suspect, even though there were clear signs of foul play. They completely ignored the possibility that something bad had happened to him.
It's almost as if they were trying to protect someone. That's scary. What about Ajit Jai Singh? And there's a suspect named Janine who disappeared while in police custody.
Right. Ajit Jayasinghe was arrested and detained. Now, while he was in custody, another suspect named Jean, who was being held by P.S. Ratnaik of the Peliagoda CSU, remember, that's the counter-subversive unit, he also disappeared. The commission was pretty sure that Jean was killed by CSU officers, and they believed that senior officers like DAG Meryl Gunaratne, SSP Nalin Delgoda, and ASP Raja Dias knew about it.
So they're saying that officers within the police force were involved in extrajudicial killings. That's a very serious accusation. And it sounds like they were trying to cover it up.
Absolutely. And here's another detail that points to a cover-up. Even though Jean disappeared under very suspicious circumstances while in Ratnaik's custody, Ratnaik didn't face any disciplinary action. It's as if his superiors were protecting him.
Wow. So the commission uncovered evidence of abductions, torture, and even extrajudicial killings. And it seems that many people within the police force were involved. The outline also mentions meetings that happened at Batalanda. What was the significance of these meetings?
The commission did find that meetings were held at Batalanda. Some were at Ranil Wickremesinghe's official circuit bungalow, House A22, but others were at a different house, B2. Now that's interesting because that's the same house where TM Bandula said he was detained and tortured. And it gets even more interesting. Senior police officers were at these meetings.
So high-ranking officials were meeting in a place where people were allegedly being tortured. That's pretty damning, isn't it?
Well, the commission definitely thought so. They believed that these meetings were connected to the illegal detentions and torture that were happening there. They even pointedly asked whether people who were attending meetings in a house where people were being held and tortured could really claim they didn't know what was going on.
Seems pretty hard to believe they were unaware, right?
It does. However, we need to be fair here. The different witnesses who testified about these meetings, they couldn't agree on the details. They couldn't say for sure where exactly the meetings happened, how many times they happened, what was discussed, or what happened afterwards. And no one admitted that they talked about criminal activities at these meetings.
So even though it looks really suspicious that these meetings were happening right where these terrible things were taking place, there wasn't enough solid evidence to prove that they were actually planning these illegal activities during the meetings.
Yeah.
But still, it certainly raises some serious questions about what they knew and what they were doing there. What were the commission's final conclusions after considering all of this evidence?
They concluded that the period from 1988 to 1990 was a time of immense terror in Sri Lanka. And it wasn't just the JVP that was responsible for the violence. They said that there were people within the government and even outside of it who were committing similar crimes. They even used the phrase state terrorism to describe what was happening.
State terrorism. That's a really powerful statement. What does it mean exactly?
Essentially, they were saying that the government itself was using violence and terror to achieve its goals. And what was their goal? According to the commission, the government's main objective at that time was to eliminate anyone they saw as a threat, anyone they labeled a subversive. And to achieve this, they were willing to disregard the law and basic human rights. They were willing to do whatever it took, no matter how brutal or illegal.
So basically the ends justified the means. It sounds like a really dark period in Sri Lankan history.
It was, and the commission found evidence that the government even protected people who were accused of committing these extrajudicial acts. They were shielding them from any consequences. It really shows a complete breakdown of the rule of law.
That's really disturbing. Did the commission make any recommendations based on their findings? What did they think should be done to prevent something like this from happening again?
Yes, they made several recommendations. They said that the report should be discussed in detail with every single member of parliament. The goal was to come up with clear guidelines for politicians and law enforcement agencies to follow during times of unrest or emergency. They also suggested that the country's laws should be reviewed and even changed if necessary to prevent these kinds of abuses from happening again. They even considered amending the Constitution.
Wow. It sounds like they were really determined to prevent something like this from happening again. Were there any other recommendations that you think are particularly important?
One of the most important recommendations was to give the Supreme Court more power to punish people who repeatedly violate fundamental rights. They could even lose their civic rights. This shows how seriously the Commission took these abuses.
That's a strong measure. It shows how seriously they took these abuses. Anything else?
One more thing. They realized that many people were too scared to report these abuses to the police. They were afraid of what might happen to them. So they recommended that judicial officers, like magistrates, should be given the authority to start and oversee investigations in cases where people are afraid to go to the police directly. It was a way to create a safer way for people to report these crimes.
These recommendations really tried to fix the problems that allowed these abuses to happen in the first place. It was about more than just punishing the guilty. It was about changing the system to protect people. Now let's talk about Ranil Wickremesinghe. The outline mentions his various roles in government over the years.
Right. Ranil Wickremesinghe has had a long and influential career in Sri Lankan politics. He was first elected to parliament in 1977, and he's been a major player ever since. His first time as prime minister was from May 1993 to August 1994. A lot of people say that he introduced some important economic reforms during that time. Later on, he became prime minister again from 2015 to 2019, and then briefly in 2022 before he was elected president in July of that year. He also tried to become president in 1999 and 2005, but he didn't win, and he lost his bid for re-election in 2024.
So he's had a long and complicated political journey with ups and downs. But why is the Batalanda Commission report suddenly back in the news after all these years? What sparked this renewed interest?
It's mainly because of that interview Wickremesinghe gave to Al Jazeera in 2025. He was asked about the accusations in the Batalanda Commission report, and he completely denied them. He said it was all politically motivated.
She dismissed the whole thing.
He did. And then, probably because of all the attention the interview got, the report was tabled in Parliament in March of 2025 by the leader of the House. They said they would be sending it to the Attorney General to see if any legal action should be taken. And they even scheduled a parliamentary debate on it for April.
So it's still a very sensitive issue.
Oh, definitely. And Wickremesinghe's response? Well, he's still saying the report is bogus. He even questioned why they would debate it now, more than 20 years after it was first published.
So this old report is still having a big impact on politics today. It really shows how important it is to understand what happened back then.
Absolutely. The Batalanda Commission report is a reminder of a very dark chapter in Sri Lanka's history. It's a story about violence, abuse of power, and the struggle for justice.
It's a reminder that these things can happen anywhere, anytime.
It is. And it's also a reminder that we need to be vigilant and hold our leaders accountable, no matter how powerful they are.
And for our listeners who want to learn even more about this, I would really encourage you to read the Batalanda Commission report itself. It's a long document, but it's worth reading. You can also find lots of articles and analyses online.
As we wrap up our deep dive into the Batalanda Commission report, here's something to think about. The Commission made a lot of recommendations to try to prevent these kinds of human rights violations from happening again. But the question remains, even with these recommendations, how can we ensure accountability and prevent these abuses, especially during times of conflict or when there's a lot of political turmoil? It's something to keep in mind as you continue to learn about this important issue.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. Until next time.